I see Gail there, and I know Gail likes to start meetings on time. So
she's a real journalist.
So she will send me a note. Mark, he said noon.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, listen,
3 o'clock
everyone.
here. So
welcome to another Maddy Associates speaker series. We are absolutely delighted to have a senior correspondent for McClatchy News, a political correspondent back in Washington, D.C., David Lightman, who's been doing this for over 40 years. So he has quite a wealth of experience to not only explain what's going on now, but put it in the context of his experience over that time. I want to say at the beginning that, and Dave and I talked, and we want an unvarnished opinion of what he thinks of what's going on. So that being said, this is an off-the-record conversation, okay? So we don't want things taken out of context or anything like that, but we do want David's unvarnished observations of what's going on in Washington. And as I say that, I almost shudder as I say that, frankly, but we're hoping that he can enlighten us. Like I said, I don't want to waste any more time doing the introduction, because no one came here to listen to me. They came here to listen to David. So with that, I want to introduce David Lightman with McClatchy Newspapers in Washington, D.C. And Dave, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm honored. I really am to talk to this audience. I came to Washington. I was at the Baltimore Sun back then in 1979 to cover Maryland members of Congress. And, the question you get so often today is, are things different? Well, of course, in 42 years, they'll be different. But is it more partisan? Is it harder for journalists to have access? Strangely enough, yes, it's more partisan. No, it's not more difficult to have access. When I came, there was almost a hierarchical system. There are certain people you either couldn't talk to or wouldn't talk to, or basically when you were young, you had to know your place. When I first came, one of the first series of stories I did for the Sun was about how much it cost taxpayers to have a member of Congress serving in Congress. And it was the shocking total of $1 million. And you add up all the staff salaries, the free art they get. Yes, they do get free art from they did from the National Galleries, the free parking spaces at the airport, the cars they get. I mean, it's just amazing. Anyway, we added it all up, got this figure. In those days, Tip O'Neill, who was the speaker, the legendarily gruff speaker, would have reporters in 10 minutes before the session started every day. So reporters would crowd into his office and generally, what are you going to do with this bill or that bill? So I pipe up, do you think that taxpayers are paying too much to sustain these members? And he looks at me and he says, well, who the heck are you? And he said, boys, take this kid outside and let him know how we operate around here. Well, of course, I felt like shrinking into the floor. So don't tell me it was easier then to get access. Okay, then his press secretary, who, by the way, at the time was Chris Matthews, ended up trying to tell me how things are done around here. Of course, I didn't listen because I was a tough, aggressive reporter. So the idea that somehow things have changed so much, they have. But, in the late 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s, Democrats ruled the House. They had ruled the House since the mid-1950s. These committee chairmen were godlike figures. House Ways and Means Committee, the Tax Writing Committee, wrote tax code legislation in 81. They overhauled the tax code in 86. It was controlled by Democrats. Dan Rostenkowski of Illinois was the chairman. He would tell each member, each Democrat on that committee, you can have one thing. So I had moved to the Hartford Courant in the 80s out of Connecticut, and there's a Connecticut member who wanted breaks for the insurance industry, so that's what she got. The member from California might have gotten some break for agriculture, whatever. Republicans may as well have stayed home. They got nothing. Okay, so, and when this thing went to the House floor, it was a Democratic vote. So The idea that somehow it's more partisan today, not so. It was different, partisan in a different way. The assumption at the time was that Democrats would rule the place forever. You know, the gerrymandering was such that they had safe seats. The maps were such, nobody could envision what had happened. But things did begin to change. And historians will debate for years just what changed things, changed the tone. I mean, my observation was it was really two things. One is Ronald Reagan. Reagan was able to express what was going on in Washington and express his own beliefs in simple terms. His message, I can tell you today in one sentence: get government off our backs, fight the Soviet Union, cut taxes. Boom. And he tried to do all three, arguably successful in two. The third, again, that's for historians to debate. But the fact that Reagan could simplify the message was very important. And Democrats really didn't catch on to that. Newt Gingrich took that to another level. And this is the second trend, I think. C-SPAN came on the air in the House in 1979, in the Senate in 1986. Gingrich was the first to recognize the power of TV, the power of being able to give your message unfiltered. They didn't need me or other reporters anymore to write about what they were doing. They could go right on TV. So what Gingrich did, of course, he had these conservative young Republicans make speeches on the House floor in the evening when people were watching. So they could just get up there, and it was like a nightly ad for the conservative movement. When O'Neill finally realized what was going on here, he had the cameras deliberately pan away from Gingrich and Trent Lott and Jack Kemp and some of the rest. It was too late. And you know the rest. When when Republicans took control of the House in the 1994 election, about a month before that, Gingrich and his allies had developed a contract with America, 10 simple things they would do. And I remember at the time, this was very much the legacy of Reagan. It was simple. Democrats scoffed. They said, this is much too simplistic. It's trite. It's a cliche. Guess what? It worked. Republicans, for the first time in 40 years, won control of the House. Gingrich becomes Speaker. Boom. In the 90s, Bill Clinton was able to come up with the same sort of thing. He learned that lesson. It's the economy, stupid, right? He was derailed a bit, of course, by the Lewinsky scandal. But then when Bush became president, same thing, compassionate conservatism. Iraq is bad. Cut taxes again, etc. These people adjusted to the TV generation. Now, what led to the bitterness we have today? Let's move into this era. The difference today is the bitterness, the personal animosity, if you will. Despite the battles of the 80s, 90s, aughts, and 10s, it wasn't personal. Okay, there was this acknowledgement that you fought, you could disagree without being disagreeable. Chris Dodd, the senator from Connecticut, used to say, fight as hard as you want, but don't make enemies. And I know there's this myth that they all got together at 5 o'clock and had a drink. Well, I don't know about that. But the personal side of it, I mean, as we speak, there are Democrats who still will barely talk to Republicans who voted to overturn the election back in January. They resent that so much. There are Republicans who see Democrats as nothing more than apologists for a crazed ideology. So where does this all lead? Well, ironically, you have a president who, frankly, built his reputation on consensus. I mean, you go back 70s, 80s, 90s, et cetera. Joe Biden was a consensus builder. He was part of a crowd back then that knew to get things done, you had to get both sides. Ronald Reagan used to say, if I can get 80% of what I want, I've been a success. Reagan got through a major immigration reform bill in addition to his tax cuts. But I think the story of immigration sort of tells you about the bitterness and how it's evolved. In 2007 and again in 2013, there were bipartisan immigration bills that won a lot of support. The so-called gang of, was it 6 or 8? I can't remember now. John McCain, Marco Rubio, devised a bill to provide a pathway to citizenship. 13 years, I think, at the time, and certain other provisions. It was a very, very detailed bill, had a lot of support, but the House, and it passed the Senate, by the way, I think it got 68 votes. Couldn't even get it heard in the House. They would not take it up because they knew it would get nowhere. And yet Reagan in '86 was able to do this. You know, the other day I was at a hearing on reparations for African Americans. Democrats want to set up a commission that would study the issue. There's no mention of money. There's no mention of how this would work. They want a study commission. Well, in 1988, Reagan signed legislation providing compensation for victims of the Japanese internment in World War II. Bipartisan. Voting Rights Act. That was a gimme, even under George W. Bush. Very, very little controversy about it because it was the right thing to do. Today, all Democrats, you can't. So what does this all mean? Where does this go? I'm not sure. Biden, for all his consensus building, didn't build any consensus when they passed the American Rescue Plan, that is the economic aid package that was approved about a month ago. He had 10 Republicans in, they had a plan. Depending on your point of view, their plan wasn't serious because it only spent a third of what Biden wanted to spend, or Biden really didn't want to negotiate because he wanted to win. You know, again, we'll be debating that one forever. Now he's got an infrastructure program, $2.3 trillion. He says he wants to hear from Republicans. This is going to be interesting. And to me, this is a real test of what's going to happen in the days ahead, months ahead. Because infrastructure is one of these issues that brought members together. Everybody's got roads and bridges and water systems and so on and so forth that need repair. No doubt about it. You don't have to be conservative, liberal, whatever, to know where there's a bumpy road or where the water filtration doesn't work right. And historically, Democrats and Republicans have been able to agree on this. But will they this time? I mean, they're fighting right now over the definition of infrastructure. Is infrastructure just roads and bridges, as Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell says? Or should it include childcare? Because the people who are going out to build the roads and bridges need someone to watch the kids. You're going to hear that debate coming up in about a week or two because Biden's supposed to pop his childcare proposal. What is infrastructure? Is infrastructure broadband? Well, you know, back in the 90s, there was no broadband. Maybe there was, but what is infrastructure? So they're already fighting over that definition. So if they can't even get past that, okay, how in the world are they going to try to break down $2.3 trillion? Another issue, the spending. You know, we are facing a debt that's up to what, $28 trillion right now? That's extraordinary. I mean, we are running up deficits in 1 month larger than we did in the entire decade of the 70s. Somehow, maybe this is me being old school because my training was economics, that's got to explode. I mean, I spent most of the 80s writing about how deficits were going to kill us, how interest rates were inevitably going to go up. Well, they didn't, and they still haven't. And the Fed chairman, who knows a lot more than I ever will about economics, thinks we're okay. But again, the economics textbooks tell us inflation, interest rates, and so forth are going to explode. One theory of what's going on, I can't remember whose it was, says that what you've got right now are two parties with very different focuses. The Democrats are trying to make government more efficient, more expansive, more accessible. Republicans are more interested in changing the culture. They're less interested in government. They don't see government as a useful tool. So if that's the case, then you do have two parties standing in corners. Corners is going to be hard to leave. And you say, well, wasn't that the case in the 80s and the 90s? In the 80s and the 90s, yeah, those are, in the 80s is when the Republicans first put a pro-life platform into, first implemented a pro-life platform, school prayer, so-called cultural issues. But look at the history there. Reagan talked about it, the Bushes talked about it, but they never really went to the mat for it. Now they're going to the mat for it. And those are tough issues to compromise on. You know, not to get too long-winded here, but I teach a journalism course at Maryland, and I've taught others, and we don't do this anymore, but we used to assign students to do stories on abortion because most people have a view, a pretty hard and fast view about abortion, and you have to respect both sides. This is a moral issue for people and not a political issue. And it was a great test of how fair a reporter could be if they could come back and give us a balanced view, respecting both sides. I don't know that you're getting that anymore. Because again, the personal animosities are just so extraordinary. One more example. The other day, I go back to this hearing on reparations. And at one point, the top Republican on the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, instead of talking about reparations, starts asking the chairman, Jerry Nadler of New York, did you sponsor, or are you going to sponsor a bill to increase the number of members of the Supreme Court from 9 to 13? Nadler, what's that got to do with anything? And he keeps insisting, answer the question. Well, wait a minute. This is a very serious hearing on a very serious issue. Why are you bringing this up? Republicans kept bringing this up throughout the hearing. Now, was that responsible because they had a forum? It was evening, prime time. You could argue this is a distraction. Why? Or you could say, wait a minute, why shouldn't he answer the question? Yeah, it's a hearing on reparations, but you know, tell us your thoughts on this. It'll take you a minute. You wouldn't have seen that 40 years ago. First of all, I don't think anybody would have been daring enough to interrupt a serious hearing like that with that. And if in fact a bill like that was introduced and somebody did ask a question, I suspect the chairman would have answered it. Where's all this lead? I'm not pessimistic. I really am not. Because I think in the end, things are gonna, I don't know if the two sides are gonna come together, but I think in the end, there's not gonna be an endless stalemate. One side or the other is gonna prevail. Right now, things are pretty much 50-50 in the House and Senate. Next election, we'll see if there's a Democratic wave or a Republican wave. That's going to change things. And it's happened constantly. I mean, just look back over the last 30 years. This is not the 80s when Democrats ran the House forever. It's changed hands roughly every dozen years. So, and Democrats have a very slim majority right now. I think you have a couple vacancies, but it's 218 to 213. Anyway, so I'm not pessimistic. The system has worked for over 200 years, and I think it'll keep working, but it's going to be bumpy. Let me stop there because I know you all have questions. And I'm happy to
that's a great way of introducing it and giving us some hope going forward. And I noticed some of the people that have jumped on, and we have, I will tell you, we have a wide-ranging group. We have folks like Sal Russo, a good friend who's on our board, who's worked with Governor Duke Majan, of course, Ken Maddy, and I don't want to call him an acolyte of Jack Kemp, but close to, in terms with Jack Kemp. We've got Howard Watkins on, who's a grassroots Democratic organizer in Fresno. He has since moved, but very involved with Democratic politics. So we've got the wide range of political perspectives here, which is terrific. And I know I'm missing lots of others, but I just saw those two quickly. I want to remind everyone, this is an off-the-record conversation. We want David to be blunt in his assessments. I encourage people to, in the chat room, add questions. I'm going to get things started by asking a few questions because I'm just going to take the moderator's privilege and ask Dave some questions. A few things. One is, I have three basic questions, so I hope I can get them out before people start asking questions. The first question goes to infrastructure. And I'm just wondering, what do you think the implications are for the San Joaquin Valley. We've got lots of needs, roads and whatnot. One of the big, at least political issues, obviously, is high-speed rail. Buttigieg made some comments along that. People who like high-speed rail kind of perked up and said, "Ooh, maybe we can get this thing finished." Those who don't like high-speed rail, like for example, Congressman Valadao said, this is a continuing waste of money. So just curious about your thoughts on infrastructure generally and high-speed rail in particular.
Start with high-speed rail because, Buttigieg said, I think he used the word potentially,
right,
which prompted us to write 1,000 words that afternoon, right? What's that tell you? The very fact that the Secretary of Transportation now has that thought in his brain is significant. And I think on the one hand, it's significant because the leader of the House of Representatives and the vice president are both familiar with this project. And that's a big help. This is the kind of thing that when they're writing the final, 1,000-page bill, this is where you get that sentence where Nancy Pelosi or Vice President Harris or Senator Feinstein says, hey, don't forget us. So I think there's hope. Republicans will have very little say over this. The question is who would oppose it? And right now, the opponents are just not the people who I think will be writing the bill. Peter DeFazio from Oregon is the chairman of the Transportation Committee. He is a big supporter of sort of alternative transportation, if you will. So I don't want to get your hopes up, but I think, it's gone from a 30% possibility to 60%.
Yeah, and I think in the past, if you look at major infrastructure projects, the federal government has always been involved. Interstate highway. One of the things, whether you like high-speed rail or not, that is noticeable about this major, one of the biggest infrastructure projects ever in the history of certainly the state and maybe the country, is that the federal government has played a relatively minor role so far in high-speed rail. So, they were expecting like 25% of federal investment, and that's nowhere near that. So it'd be interesting to see what happens going forward. Another big infrastructure issue that's important to the Valley is water. All kinds of things going on there. The USDA has declared a drought disaster, which frees up federal loans for farmers. I believe it's up to $500,000 they can get. And then we got Costa and Feinstein and Josh Harder, all Democrats, saying, hey, we need to put some extra money. And I don't know, I've seen 654, I've seen 800 million. I'll have to track that down, but a large amount of money to deal with the canals in the Valley, which have suffered from subsidence because they're pumping so much groundwater, the ground is actually sinking, which is making the canal sink, which means they can't flow as much water efficiently as they could in the past. So they want to spend some federal dollars to repair that. What I noticed on that is that why would that be a bipartisan proposal? I mean, I would think Valadao and Nunes and McCarthy would be on board. I'm just curious. I mean, why do you think it happened the way it happened? And is it going to change? Are they going to jump on board later or what?
I don't think they're going to jump on board a $2.3 trillion bill. I think they may try to put in an amendment, which would then be passed largely by Democrats. I think there's a way to do this without having too many fingerprints on it. The question is, can they take that out separately? And not to get into the weeds of the legislative process, could they do it as an appropriation? Okay, in other words, separate spending bills allegedly move through Congress. Is that
what you would refer to as an earmark?
No, yeah, it could be, yeah.
And I was thinking that's something, if you earmark specifically the canals, yeah, I would think that would have bipartisan support among Valley legislators.
Well, there's a great big movement to bring those back. They were banned 10 years ago, 12 years ago, because what would happen is a lot of people like me would look through it and find the Lawrence Welk Museum in North Dakota or the Road to Nowhere in Alaska, which in fairness, that was 1% of this. The counter argument was, hey, we know our district better than anybody. So why not let us have this?
Well, one man's pork is another person's investment.
Yeah. I mean, so the other thing is these projects got in these bills anyway. They just weren't called earmarks. Right. So I think they could bring that back. Something's going to happen there. Yeah. There's too much bipartisan support. As you say, McCarthy is a power, even though Republicans are in the minority. The other good news, I think, sort of piggybacking what I said, is that California is being heard again. Remember, the Trump administration made California out to be villains. Remember when he came out and visited the wildfire areas and so forth and said basically it's a matter of cleaning up the area? Biden has a vice president who knows the state and a Speaker of the House who knows the state. So the only problem, and I don't think this is going to affect the water issue, is that a lot of the political power in Congress in California tends to be down south, right, in the Los Angeles area, or maybe the Bay Area to some degree, but not necessarily in the Valley. And no offense to Harder, but
well, I mean, another thing, a reporter asked me recently about they're hearing that Devin Nunes is, because he's on Ways and Means, is kind of angling to be chair. I don't know what his seniority is, but bottom line is he's angling to be chair. And so if the Republicans do win the midterms, which is not uncommon in the first term of a presidential term, Devin Nunes could be chair of Ways and Means. You know, we had Bill Thomas from the Valley, you know, for many years.
Yeah. No, he sure could. He's next in line, and Kevin Brady from Texas, current top Republican, is retiring. Now, that doesn't mean Nunes would automatically ascend. In fact, depending on who Kevin McCarthy, it would really be up to McCarthy, assuming he remains leader, which I think he will. That's happened before. They skipped over people who maybe they saw as too toxic, too controversial, and so forth. But at the moment, yeah, Nunes is in line for that job.
Yeah, that would be rather significant, I would think, for the Valley. It would be interesting to see if he changed his perspective on earmarks, if he becomes chair of Ways and Means. You might get a Devin Nunes highway or something going somewhere.
Not out of the question.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions for David about what's going on in Washington these days? I'd like to open it up to others. Please don't be bashful. Okay, what do you think the status of HR 1 is at this point?
Ooh. Yeah, it's got to get through the Senate. That's the problem. And I'm just
by the way, talk about the filibuster too. And you know, Manchin has come out and said we're not going to touch it. But there's always, I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, so there's always a way to kind of ish it, though, you know, to work around. What do you think's going to happen with the filibuster?
Yeah. See, I'm just thinking here. The thing with HR 1, each side is suspicious of the other, that they're somehow manipulating the system to their advantage. And you could argue all day whether HR 1 does that or doesn't do that, so on and so forth. But that's the suspicion. And given what happened in Georgia, and we can interpret that both ways, Democrats are wary. They want this bill. I don't see it getting 60 in the Senate.
You don't think that the corporations have responded more strongly, I think, than the Republicans anticipated. I don't think the Republicans anticipated that pushback. Will that get the Republican leadership's attention, saying, well, maybe we went a little too far here?
I thought it would. I thought when the All-Star game got pulled from Atlanta. Yeah, I thought, but it hasn't, to be honest with you. No, this is pretty ingrained that there's this feeling that somehow Democrats are trying to manipulate the system in their favor.
Could that be through, through negotiations, kind of, I don't want to say watered down, but some of the more controversial elements of HR 1 be taken out, but the key components move forward?
Yes, but if you did that, would it go? Yeah, it would have to go back to the House. Right. And I don't know if the House is going to go for that. You know, the Democrats have this tiny majority now. It only takes people talk about the Senate being 50-50. Democrats lose 3 or 4 votes. That's it. Yeah. And that's a real problem. The question ultimately is how much political capital does Biden want to spend on HR 1? I mean, he did the American Rescue Plan. Now he's on to infrastructure. Does he want to, I don't want to say get bogged down in this, but I suspect infrastructure is going to take until probably August, maybe beyond. Does he want to tie himself up? And he's getting good approval ratings right now. He's doing popular things.
Right.
This is popular with a certain segment of the electorate, but not the way the rescue plan and infrastructure are. So,
well, there's, I teach labor relations, union management relations, and there's the PRO Act that's out there. That would be the biggest change in labor law in 60, 70 years. Mm-hmm. Something he's promised the unions he'll do. Yeah. I don't know. That seems to be, quite a stretch, but it's interesting, just looking at him when it comes to labor relations, he is clearly the most vocal pro-union president we've had in 50 years.
I was going to say, I've been watching this stuff since, Nixon, and I can't remember somebody so strongly pro-union. No.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think he's doing it probably for political purposes, and certainly the unions like to hear that. I don't know if that act is really going on, particularly because of the Senate, the filibuster. It seems hard to believe that anything really will happen there. Someone was asking about, were you around on January 6th when that happened?
No, I was not there. I was basically told to stay away. Not that I thought there'd be riots, but we were told to stay out of harm's way.
What's the aftermath of that when around the Capitol?
Well, I was there the next day, and I go into the Capitol 3-4 days a week to work. The strange part was when you went back a day later, and we have a desk there. I have a desk there right in the Capitol. The way it works is the reporters are literally outside the Senate door on the top floor. So there's my desk with all the junk on it, and looking like reporter desks do, with my computer open and all that. Nobody touched anything. It was like nothing had happened when you walked in there. I mean, the snack bar was open, the cops were still in the halls. You walked upstairs. There was, the Washington Post for me to read, and the Baltimore Sun, and my messy desk. It was just odd. But there are subtle and not so subtle changes. For example, we don't have the access we had. It used to be you have the House chamber, and then right behind it, there's a long strip called the Speaker's Lobby. And that was a great place for reporters to hang out, talk to House members. Not anymore, off limits. They have magnetometers at each entrance to the House now. The fence, there was a 7-foot high fence several blocks from the Capitol itself. Now I have a parking permit, so I can drive in, but every day they had to check my car, check me, drove through the fence, parked my car, they checked me again. I went through 4 or 5 checks before I could finally get to where I needed to go, which is fine. Actually, they took away the 7-foot fence, and now I park outside. There's still a fence around the Capitol itself, but I park outside that fence, which kind of makes me nervous, or did. But my 3-block walk from my car, which is a Senate-sanctioned parking lot, to the Capitol, I can't go 100 feet without passing National Guard troops or police. They are everywhere. Yeah, I mean, every day, half a block from where I park are 2 armed National Guardsmen.
Boy, so let's hope that changes.
The security is that. The other thing that's different is how quiet everything is, especially this time of year. Used to be, we would complain because you try to get around the Capitol and all these tourists were everywhere, blocking the halls, blocking my access. Well, they're not there anymore, and it's creepy.
Yeah. Someone's asking about another very important issue in the Valley, and that's immigration reform. Dreamers having a pathway to citizenship. You think that's a big issue for the Democrats? Do you think that's going to be accomplished?
Well, okay, this goes back to what I was saying before. Where does Biden use his political capital? Immigration is an issue he cannot avoid. I mean, this border crisis now is his. It's not Trump's anymore. So he needs to do something. And as Democrats, Republicans stretching back 100 years have learned, there's no easy answer here. The legislation to create a path for citizenship is back. I think it's 11 years now. But Republicans are really reluctant to sign on. They just are. They know.
Reagan had the big act in '86.
Exactly.
Supposed to fix it.
Yep. The Simpson-Mazzoli, I think. Yeah. And in 2013, not that long ago, the Senate got 68 votes for a bipartisan bill. So, and Rubio's still there. Lindsey Graham was part of that, I think. He's still there. But Republicans, they don't quite know what to do with this issue. Graham has talked about some kind of, consensus, and maybe it'll happen. I don't know.
There's a question here about Senator Manchin. Do you think he'd support any kind of amendment to the filibuster? What I'm hearing is he's pretty much saying no. Though Biden had talked about the talking filibuster. If you're going to do this, you got to stand up on the floor, and you get to hold the floor as long as you can talk, and I guess hold yourself from going to the bathroom or something. But
yeah.
Is that something that Manchin would be on board with, or you think no, he wants to keep it the way it is?
I think at the moment he wants to keep it the way it is, but one thing you learn around here is nothing is cast in stone. Here's the problem Manchin's having. And 7-8 years ago, when they changed the filibuster rule on judicial appointments, and a lot of the old timers didn't like it, including Chuck Schumer. A lot of old time Democrats said, don't do this, because if you go from 60 to 50, 51, it's
Harry Reid's proposal.
Yeah. And they changed it to 51, and that kicked the door open for the Republicans when they took control to take it down to 51 for the Supreme Court. Well, you change the filibuster now, you're going to get HR 1 through, you're going to get infrastructure through. But what happens in 2 years if Republicans reclaim the Senate? What happens if in 2024 you have a Republican president in Congress again? And this is the thinking of Manchin right now.
Well, if they get DC statehood and Puerto Rico, maybe it's not going to matter.
Well, but boy, that's
that's a whole other right.
We'll see.
Yeah, let me ask you, because I've got a few questions I want to keep asking you. Another person's asking about the money concentrating on existing roads and alternative transportation as opposed to new roads. Is there any desire? Well, I don't know if you know this, but any desire by developers in Fresno to build out Highway 180 and 168? Lack of spending for city maintenance. Basically, what about new projects versus maintaining existing projects? Just as an FYI, we had a gas tax in California a few years ago. It was, I don't think people, if they're paying attention, I think a lot of people thought it was going to result in expanded roadways and new road. Not really. If you looked at it closely, it really was to fix our existing roads. It's not very sexy, frankly, to fix roads. People want to see new highways. What about this infrastructure bill? Are you seeing the money going to new roads or fixing the existing infrastructure?
Yeah, the California thing was fix it first. In fact, we just wrote about this, a state highway report that that Caltrans does. They presented it last month at the California Transportation Commission. It showed that even with the increase in the gas tax, the bill from 2017, added to the federal money, they still see a shortfall of $6.1 billion a year just to fix it first. So I think that's the priority. There's a good report from the American Society of Civil Engineers and another one from the American Road and Transportation Association that lists, you can look it up online, and it'll show you the bridges in California and Fresno County and so forth that need repair. And there's the priority. And there are an enormous number of bridges and roads that are just in desperate need of fixing. And that's the priority. It doesn't mean new roads won't be funded. And I don't think an infrastructure bill would put a prohibition on that. But usually it's up to the state to decide what it wants to do. And by the way, one interesting thing, that's another one where you wonder if this area, the valley, is going to get shortchanged because most of these defective bridges and roads are south. In fact, I think that 9 of the top 10 bridges in the worst shape are all Orange County, Los Angeles County, Ventura County.
That's where the votes are,
Well, that too.
Right? I mean, that's one of the problems. That's why I think the valley, it's so important for the valley to work together and not be at cross purposes. I mean, we, from Stockton to Bakersfield, we have to have a unified voice to be able to really have a seat at the table. This is a wide range discussion, which I kind of like, and it's keeping you on your toes, because I'm going to throw another question at you from a colleague of mine at the School of Business, Rich DeJordi, was asking about, is there a myth here about the Reagan, Tip O'Neill relationship? Oh, they got along so well, they'd fight during the day, but they'd have drinks in the evening. Was that myth or reality?
Pretty much reality from what I saw. I remember in '81, they Reagan had proposed this 25% 3-year tax cut, the Kemp-Roth tax cut. And people at the time said, that's crazy. You're gonna cut. And Tip O'Neill,
didn't Bush, was that when the Bush called voodoo economics? I guess I don't know who was running in 1980.
That was during the 80 campaign,
right.
Yeah. So, and you had all these theories nobody ever heard, supply side economics, trickle down. That's where all that started. And O'Neill was like, what is this? Well, lo and behold, it passes the Senate like 97-3 or something. It was an overwhelming vote. And then it comes to the House, and O'Neill couldn't get it. He was overwhelmed. Reagan had been shot, of course, on March 30th. He came back a month later and made a triumphant speech in Congress. He became enormously popular. O'Neill tried to stop this. They even proposed their own tax cut plan. But I remember him lamenting at one of these press conferences I got allowed back into. He said, I just can't defeat this guy. This is amazing. The power. Reagan knew how to use TV. He redefined success in Congress. It was amazing. And O'Neill respected that because he respected power. And Reagan had it. And
one of the things, it seems to me that one of the things that's overlooked, frankly, is Reagan was an actor.
Yeah.
And he knew how to act the part of a politician.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to be very much, when I host a TV show, there's a way a host is supposed to act, right? You get the pensive look. There's all kinds of things that you can act the part. As my wife told other people, and I will share this with our little group here. I was asking my wife one time what she thought of my hosting of our TV show, The Maddy Report, and her response was, with a pregnant pause for emphasis, she said, "Well, you look intelligent." And I think that in some ways captures a lot of what, when you're doing media stuff, it's the presentation. And I think Reagan was very smooth. And frankly, as much as Joe Biden is a very nice guy, if you put a press conference of Reagan up against a press conference of Joe Biden, I mean, Reagan looks pretty smooth.
Well, it was a lesson for me. 1980 was the first presidential campaign I'd covered. And at the time, Ted Kennedy was running on the Democratic side against Carter. And then on the Republican side, you had Bush's father and Howard Baker. And the common wisdom was that you won the presidency the way Carter had, going to small groups, shaking hands, showing what a great guy you were. And Bush had that down pat. He was a master of it. In fact, you talk about press access now. Bush would sit in hotel lobbies and just hold court. Anybody who came by, including media, he was just happy to talk to you. He loved it. Reagan, I remember going out with Reagan, and it was all very scripted. You went to the event, he got up there, gave the same speech every time, and left. And that was it. There was no mingling, well, guess what? He clobbered Bush in New Hampshire, and what the heck's going on here? Because you say Reagan mastered the modern age, just as Gingrich did. And to some extent, just as Trump did. Trump understood how to harness, and still does understand how to harness the power of the media. Yeah. So Reagan really did redefine this.
I know you're not totally focused on local politics, so there were some questions about some local stuff, and I don't think you really could opine on. But I want to ask you, we're going to end up with just the opposite. We're going to go global on you. You're seeing a change in the world now, right? United States had been the dominant power for 50, 60 years. Russia really is, what did McCain call it? A gas station with nuclear bombs or something? Nuclear weapons. I mean, it's really not a strong economic power. It's really China. And I've seen other research that says really we're converting into a tripolar world with Asia and China as the center, Europe with Germany as the center, and the Americas with the US as the center. Frankly, in that equation, US is probably third. But there is it may be a changing of the guard from the United States being the dominant world power. China is certainly asserting itself. They're talking about, hey, we want Taiwan, it's ours. They're flexing their muscles. How do you see that dynamic going forward, that relationship between China and the United States? And, they're very interdependent too, of course, because economically so intertwined. How do you see that evolving?
Well, it's interesting watching Biden. He's really not, you could almost argue he's tweaking Trump's China policy. He's not radically different from where Trump was. Trump got tough with China. Biden's getting not quite as tough, but he's not throwing it all away either. I think the feeling, at least at the Capitol, is that as long as the U.S. has the defense capability it does, it remains the superpower for all kinds of reasons. In other words, economically, China may be starting to get ahead of us, but the U.S. is still the power to be reckoned with. And I think that gives us a lot of leverage with China and, for that matter, Europe.
Do you see, I would think, that U.S. is going to really re-engage with our partners in Asia, Japan, Korea, Australia, to really form some kind of alliance to constrain China and China's ambitions?
There's a lot of talk about that, but again, a lot of the European countries have their own relationships. Same problem we have with Russia. We're imposing sanctions now. Well, Germany has certain needs from Ukraine that we could all get into.
Do you think that because of Trump, the world has lost their reliance on the United States as a true partner? They're thinking, well, we really can't trust the United States because they could have another, Trump 2.0. Europe really needs to have, be more united. Maybe we need to really have our own military presence, and Asia maybe needs to think, well, we need to partner among our neighbors and not rely so much on the United States.
I'm not trying to duck it, but I think it's too early to answer that question. Remember, go back to Reagan for a minute. And there was similar talk then, because Reagan came in with his bombastic talk. Remember, we're going to bomb in 5 minutes, the evil empire, on and on. El Salvador is a threat to the world. And everybody's, oh my God, he's going to kill our alliances. He's going to ruin us. Well, it turned out okay, arguably. And we can debate that all day. So I think we have to wait and see if Trump's tough line, in fact, worked or not. Biden is trying to reestablish the alliances, trying to reestablish trust. But can that go too far? Jimmy Carter tried to do that, remember. Right. And next thing you know, the Soviets are invading Afghanistan. So again, I'm not trying to duck, but have me back in 2 years and we'll talk about it.
There you go. Well, I want, first of all, I want to thank you for taking your time in a very busy day to talk to our folks. Just an incredibly interesting discussion and insights. Really, really appreciate it. I will let you, is there anything else you'd like to say to our group before we sign off?
Other than keep reading McClatchy, but
right.
No, I will say this. This is, I've been doing this, 40 years in Washington and 10 years before that. That's how old I am, and locally. And, what I learned locally, working in Baltimore and other small newspapers, really helped inform me. It sort of taught me about people who weren't like me. And I still love the business after all these years. For all the complaints about journalism, and yeah, we got a lot of problems, there's still lots of good, hardworking reporters and editors out there who are trying to be fair, like me. So I hope people appreciate that. But don't hesitate to call us when we're wrong. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate your insights. And we know, obviously, democracy does not function in the dark. We rely on journalists to keep us informed because, it's critical. I want to thank you, David Lightman, very much for being with us, for being our guest in the Maddy Associates Speaker Series, and all of you for joining us. I really appreciate it. We were going to try to have another Maddy Associate meeting, maybe 2 more this year. We are working on a meeting with U.S. Senator Padilla, and then possibly another meeting with the head of high-speed rail, Brian Kelly. So that's what we're working. They're in the works. They're not nailed down yet, but those will be our upcoming Maddy Speaker Series, which should be very, very interesting. So thanks again for all of you for joining us. And David, thank you in particular. Really appreciate your time.